This is Michael Coffey, pastor of First English Lutheran Church, and this is a Tiny Desk sermon. This is a first look at the readings for this coming Sunday in the Lectionary and some initial reflections on them. This coming Sunday, October 7th, is Lectionary 27, and I have to say, these are the wrong texts for this Sunday. I'm a lectionary preacher 99.5% of the time, and given the moment we're living in our country and the issues surrounding women and Me Too and sexual harassment and the Kavanaugh hearings and all these things, these are some very, very difficult texts to hear on Sunday. Now, I happen to be preaching on a different set of texts this Sunday because we are observing St. Francis Day, so we have some wonderful creation-themed texts and texts focused on care of the poor to honor St. Francis. But you might be in a position of preaching on these texts. So one option is to simply use different texts. The other option is to think about them a little differently because of the context we're in. The first reading is from Genesis 2. It's the story of Adam needing companionship, and it says, the Lord says it's not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner. And then you think, well, okay, so God's going to create Eve. But actually, God creates a bunch of animals that Adam names, and then eventually none of them are quite good enough. So then out of Adam's rib, God creates Eve. It's a text with a lot of potential, a lot of important things to say about human relationships, but it also is a text that far too easily leans towards subordination of women and has a sense of unequalness in relationship, even though it says that a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife and they become one flesh. We all know historically how this text and what follows has led to a subordinate role for women, which in this moment where that's really the very issue, that women are subordinate in sexual relationships and power relationships. That's a very hard text for people to hear right now. So that has to be addressed. The second thing I want to talk about is the gospel reading, which is from Mark chapter 10, 2 to 16. And it's the question about divorce. And the Pharisees say, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And Jesus says, well, Moses gave you that commandment for your hardness of heart, that if there's good reason, if there's good cause, that a man could divorce his wife, but otherwise no. And Jesus goes on to say them, but if you look back at Genesis, if you listen to the original intention of marriage, divorce really doesn't make any sense. Given that they become one flesh, you can't pull that flesh apart. So he turns it into a conversation about intention, and that if a man dismisses his wife, even for the reasons that were considered okay, you in effect are committing adultery because you can't separate those things. And Jesus surprisingly says, and if a woman divorces her husband, the same thing. Well, again, these texts have some important things to say and to wrestle with and to figure out in our modern context how they speak. But in this moment, I think these are texts that are very, very hard to hear. Removing the possibility of divorce within the context of marital abuse and the other things that happen that are about subordination of women in relationships is not the right thing to hear right now, or at least not with very, very careful explication of what the text is saying and not saying. Given the long history of people who have been divorced being alienated from the church because of moral judgment or because of sacramental exclusion in the Roman Catholic Church, these are texts that need a lot of sensitivity. I've struggled over the years how to preach them, to honor the text and to honor the people who have struggled with failed marriages and are maybe remarried and are trying to be faithful to their vows and to their families and to their faith. But in this moment, if you're going to read and preach on these texts, I think what we have to do is honor the women in the texts. We need to uplift, liberate, and seek justice for the women in the text. Because if we can do that, we can do the same thing for the women in the assembly. There are too many important issues being addressed right now, and they're very difficult, and they have lots of ramifications, and people have different ways of thinking about them, but they have to be addressed. So what we have to do this Sunday, if we're going to preach these texts, is honor the women, liberate the women in the text, liberate the women in the room, liberate the men in the room from needing to be in a power position over women, and get at the better stuff in the text. But you can't just jump there. You can't just say the text says that we're all equal, because there's something else going on in these texts that has to be addressed. So good luck with that. I'll be preaching and enjoying St. Francis and blessing a bunch of furry critters, and celebrating creation and celebrating care of the poor. Peace to all.